The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth as Thomas wandered through the decaying forest. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to twist and writhe like dark spirits. Thomas shivered, pulling his coat tighter around him. But it wasn't the cold that made him tremble. The villagers had warned him not to venture into the woods after sunset. They spoke of strange occurrences, of people who ventured in and never returned, or came back, changed. But Thomas had laughed it off, thinking them superstitious fools. He needed to find his brother, who had disappeared into these woods 3 nights ago. "Peter," he called, his voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Peter, where are you?" His only answer was the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. He pressed on, heart pounding louder with each step, the forest growing denser and darker. The path ahead seemed to close in on him, the trees leaning closer as if to whisper secrets of old. Then, he saw a faint light flickering in the distance. Hope surged within him, and he hurried toward it. The light led him to a small clearing where an old, dilapidated house stood, barely visible under the tangled vines and moss. The door creaked open slightly, as if inviting him in. Thomas hesitated, but the thought of his brother pushed him forward. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The air inside was colder, filled with an unsettling stillness. "Peter?" he called again, his voice echoing off the crumbling walls. A faint sound reached his ears, a soft, rhythmic whispering. He followed it, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, leading him to a room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, and Thomas pushed it open with trembling hands. Inside, the room was empty, save for a large, cracked mirror hanging on the far wall. The whispers filled the room, coming from the mirror itself. Thomas approached it cautiously, peering into the cracked surface. His own reflection stared back at him, but there was something wrong. His reflection's eyes were wide with terror, and its lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. "What happened to you?" Thomas whispered, his breath fogging the glass. The reflection's eyes darted to the corner of the room, and Thomas turned slowly. In the corner stood a figure, shadowy and indistinct. As it stepped into the pale moonlight streaming through the window, Thomas gasped. It was Peter, but twisted and deformed, his eyes hollow and empty, his mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. "Thomas!" Peter's voice was a chilling whisper, barely recognizable. "What happened to you?" The words sent a shiver down Thomas' spine. He stumbled back, his heart racing. "Peter, what did they do to you?" Peter's smile widened, revealing sharp, broken teeth. "Join us, Thomas. Become one of us." Thomas felt a cold hand on his shoulder and turned to see his own reflection standing behind him, its eyes gleaming with malice. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing closer, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "No!" Thomas screamed, but it was too late. The shadows enveloped him, pulling him into the mirror. The last thing he saw was his brother's twisted smile, and then everything went dark. The next morning, the villagers found the old house empty, save for a single, cracked mirror. In its reflection, they saw not their own faces, but the faces of those who had ventured into the woods and never returned, their eyes wide with terror, forever trapped in the mirror's glass. The villagers whispered among themselves, their fear palpable as they gazed into the mirror. Stories of the haunted woods had circulated for generations, but now, seeing the faces of their lost loved ones trapped in the glass, those tales felt more real and terrifying than ever. One among them, an old woman named Eliza, stepped forward. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, and she had lived in the village longer than anyone could remember. "We must break the curse," she said, her voice steady. "We cannot leave them trapped in there." The villagers exchanged anxious glances, but nodded in agreement. Eliza knew of an ancient ritual that might set the spirits free. They gathered the necessary items: candles, herbs, and a silver knife, and returned to the clearing under the cover of night. Inside the decrepit house, Eliza placed the mirror on the floor and arranged the candles in a circle around it. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening as if aware of their presence. Eliza began to chant in a language older than the village itself, her voice rising and falling like a haunting melody. The mirror's surface shimmered, and the faces within began to move, their expressions pleading and desperate. Eliza continued the ritual, her hands steady as she used the silver knife to cut her palm, letting the blood drip onto the mirror's surface. The glass seemed to absorb the blood, the crimson liquid spreading like veins through the cracks. Suddenly, a bone-chilling wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. The villagers huddled together, their fear growing as the shadows danced around them. The mirror glowed with an eerie light, and the faces of the trapped souls began to scream silently, their mouths open in agony. Eliza's chanting grew louder, more forceful. The mirror trembled, the light within it pulsating. Then, with a deafening crack, the glass shattered, sending shards flying across the room. The screams ceased, replaced by a heavy silence. The villagers stared in shock as the spirits of their lost loved ones emerged from the shards, their forms translucent and shimmering. They floated before the villagers, their expressions of pain replaced with relief and gratitude. Thomas and Peter were among them, their ghostly forms entwined. "Thank you," Peter's spirit whispered, his voice like a gentle breeze. "We are free." The spirits began to fade, their forms dissipating into the night. The villagers watched in awe, tears streaming down their faces. The curse had been lifted, but the memory of the horrors within the woods would linger. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the villagers left the clearing, their steps lighter, but their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what they had witnessed. Eliza, the last to leave, paused at the doorway of the old house. She glanced back at the shattered mirror, now just a pile of glass fragments. "May you all find peace," she whispered, and with that, she turned and walked away, leaving the haunted woods behind. But deep within the forest, the shadows still whispered, and the legend of the cursed mirror continued to haunt the village for generations to come. Years passed, and the story of the haunted woods and the cursed mirror became a distant memory for many in the village. However, the older generations never forgot, and they continued to warn their children to stay away from the forest after dark. Despite their warnings, curiosity sometimes got the better of the young. One evening, a group of teenagers, emboldened by tales of bravery and skeptical of old superstitions, decided to explore the old house. Among them was Emma, a girl with a keen interest in the paranormal and a stubborn determination to uncover the truth. "Come on, it's just a story," Emma said, leading the way through the forest. "What's the worst that could happen?" Her friends followed hesitantly, their nerves evident despite their attempts to appear fearless. As they approached the clearing, the air grew colder, and the familiar scent of damp earth filled their nostrils. The old house loomed ahead, more decayed than ever, its presence sending a chill down their spines. Inside, the house was eerily silent. Dust coated every surface, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. Emma's flashlight illuminated the remnants of the past ritual-melted candles and the dried bloodstains on the floor. "Look," Emma said, pointing to the spot where the mirror once lay. "This is where it happened." One of her friends, Jack, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should go back. This place gives me the creeps." Emma shook her head, determined to press on. "Just a little longer. I want to see if there's anything left of the mirror." They searched the house, but found nothing unusual until they reached the attic. In the far corner, covered in dust and cobwebs, lay a large, cracked piece of mirror. Emma's heart raced as she approached it, the air growing colder with each step. "Guys, look at this," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The mirror fragment was larger than the rest, and as Emma wiped away the dust, she saw her reflection staring back at her except it wasn't quite her. The eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep, filled with a malevolence that made her skin crawl. "Emma, let's go," Jack urged, but it was too late. The attic door slammed shut, and the air grew thick with an oppressive darkness. The reflection in the mirror began to move, its lips forming silent words. Emma felt a cold hand grip her shoulder, and she spun around to see a shadowy figure looming over her. "Emma, join us," it whispered, its voice like the rustling of leaves. Her friend screamed, But Emma stood frozen, her eyes locked on the mirror. The figure reached out, its hand passing through her chest, filling her with an icy dread. She felt herself being pulled into the mirror, the world around her distorting and fading. With a final, desperate scream, Emma vanished, leaving her friends to pound helplessly on the locked attic door. The mirror fragment lay on the floor, its surface rippling like water. From within, Emma's face appeared, her eyes wide with terror, trapped just as Thomas and Peter had been. The villagers found the house empty once again, save for the mirror fragment and the echo of the teenager's fear. Eliza's warnings had been forgotten, and the curse of the mirror had claimed another victim. The legend grew, and the villagers knew one thing for certain: the mirror's curse was far from over, and the shadows in the forest would always hunger for more souls.